Welcome back to the third installment in the performance vlog. We are at the end now, coming to the end of the conditioning deload, which if you followed along from last week, you would have seen we did that strength deload to really sort of minimize how much we're dropping out in that single week. So if you want to understand a bit more as to why I split it up, go back and watch the last one. I might even link it above for you to go check out. But yeah, this week was a conditioning deload, and you would have just seen in a bit of the introduction to this video, a few of the recovery practices I'm going through. I might do a separate entry into this series, talking more about the things I do for recovery, because I know a few of you in particular have mentioned that interest in what are your recovery practices before. So you would have seen things like a little bit of hydrotherapy, so just walking around, doing some cold water immersion out in the bay, which as much as the temperature's warming up outside, the bay is still quite cold, so it's pretty good for that at the moment still. Really good way of just resetting everything, getting nice and calm, also putting me into what we call a parasympathetic state, which is a really fancy way of saying it. It gets the nervous system and the body as a whole, as a result, into more of that rest and regenerative state, which is really, really good to then get you into things like being able to sleep a little bit better, being a lot more calm and relaxed, so you can process that recovery a little bit quicker than just sort of being still in that sort of, when I say hyped up state that you might be after like a high intense interval session or a difficult or a really explosive type strength session. And you would have seen the recovery boots as well, the compression. I always enjoy those because it means I can just sit down, get some food in, maybe hydrate as well, but also either get some work done, or as you would have seen, just play a little bit of PlayStation and just really switch off for a bit. But as I mentioned, this one was the conditioning deload. So we did a few changes on the fly as well, which I'll get to when I get into Training Peaks, talking about how I managed a bit of fatigue this week. But if you aren't aware of what's happening in the first extra episode, or the bonus episode that's going to be for our channel members only, where I go through and I analyze everything in a lot more detail in Training Peaks. Really, I'm planning on going through the first block of training, so the first 4 weeks, have a look at what I did in week 1 all the way through to week 4. How did my data progress? What heart rate trends am I looking for? Really analyzing it as if I'm my own client from a sports science perspective. So if you are interested in checking out those videos, like I said, they're members only. So if you do want to join, down below, click the join button. Less than $1 a month, you can get access to those videos. And I reckon they're going to be a pretty interesting insight in terms of my thought process from a practitioner perspective. I know a lot of these insights that you're getting already are really great from an athlete side of things, but I think that's where more I'm going to switch back into my usual sports scientist mode and really go through how I actually analyze training and make some informed decisions off the back of it. So it's going to be a bit more detailed, a little bit longer episodes, but if you're interested in that, like I said, click the join button down below. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to jump back across the Training Peaks like I have done the last couple of weeks. And I think it's an interesting one to look at this week, given that we are talking about the conditioning deload. That's what most of you are going to be here to see. I know I spoke a bit last week about how it was the strength side of things. I didn't go into too much detail because the strength side of things hasn't really progressed super far just yet. So a lot of it was just reducing some of the sets and reps. The conditioning deload, a little bit different in terms of it's a little bit more obvious change. So I clearly dropped out a significant amount of volume out of the week. The principle always with the conditioning deload, if we're talking about running, cycling, rowing, swimming, is we have to maintain the intensity. I can't stress that enough. You have to maintain the intensity, reduce the volume. That's going to be the best way to maximize the adaptation in terms of ultimately recovery, because we're not doing as much, but also not lose any along the way as well. We don't want to detrain in this process by reducing all that intensity out for then ultimately me to come back next week and have to try and work all of it back. We want to keep some in so the body's still keeping up with what it needs to do and what it's required to do. We just don't want to challenge it with too much. So that's where you will see some clear changes in that regard. What you can overall, I guess, see here from a Training Peaks perspective is, if you remember back to last week, I've actually flipped my rest day around. I got to Monday this week and I was just pretty flat, pretty tired. And I went, you know what? I'm going to take the rest day early and allow my body to have the recovery when it needs it most now, rather than keep pushing it and ultimately delaying my overall recovery process. And so what I did was I brought my rest day from Saturday, flipped it to the Monday, took that off, just let myself repair and recover. Brought my gym session and my interval run onto the same day because I needed to get a double session in somewhere, and that was going to be probably the best case scenario, coming off a complete day of rest. Let's go into a double day because that's where I'm going to be best prepared to handle that initially. Just strength yesterday, bike session today in terms of my intervals, and you'll notice comparative to last week, see the amount of working time. You'd see aiming for about 15 minutes of working time last week, 6 minutes. Significantly dropped the volume, but we've maintained the intensity, still aiming for that high percentage of VO2 max in those efforts, aiming for that 280, 285, which is about 95% of my MAP, my maximum aerobic power, which is that perfect stimulus for things like 2-minute intervals. And then ultimately, you can see the big, I guess, deload here is that running wise, last week, I didn't quite hit as long as what I would have liked to hit by the end of the week. And I didn't quite get my bike done, but in terms of reducing that volume, 44 minutes down to about 35 minutes is what I'm planning to do on the weekend. I've still got the 3 runs in the week because I do want to keep the legs ticking along. And so we've got the 30-minute runs instead of the 40-minute runs. So I've just taken about 20 or 25 minutes out of the week, which is a significant chunk of volume, given that if we're having a look at my overall training week, I'm not actually training, when I say that much, comparatively to a lot of athletes. Taking that much volume out is appropriate. So I've clearly just gone, reduced a bunch of the volume, maintained the intensity. This next block is going to be really important to reload some of that volume and really start to prepare for the actual preseason period. So my official preseason per se is going to kick off partway through this block. And what I mean by that is the introduction of things like change of direction as an emphasis of the program, introducing my more maximal sprinting speed type stuff and maybe some repeat sprint type efforts. I had a look on my phone the other day. I think it might only be about 10 weeks or so till round 1. So the first day I have to be fully ready to go for games. Not that I'm expecting to be at my peak fitness in January, because obviously it's going to be a long year of multiple different competitions and different seasons in terms of my umpiring, but that's the first game that really matters in terms of my year, if that makes sense. So that's where I have to be fully ready. So really, I really want to start that really specific block of training about that sort of 8 or so weeks out to give me plenty of time to incorporate some of the acceleration, change direction type work, the really high speed stuff, not just VO2, I'm talking well above that, the anaerobic type stuff as well. Introduce some power into the gym sessions and more explosive movements in those gym sessions, some plyometric type stuff. All of that's going to start to come as part of this block, but the aerobic side of things is still really, really critical, and that's what I wanted to emphasize. That's what you're going to see in terms of the key change going into next week, is that no longer am I just going to have one interval run and then one bike set of intervals. Those bike intervals are going to be gone. As much as I've really enjoyed doing them, they've been a good change. From a specificity perspective, they just don't make as much sense as me doing the 2 running intervals. And this was always kind of the plan. I just wasn't sure how early I wanted to bring this in. But I think my running's progressed to a point where I feel like I can handle those 2 interval sessions now. And I think introducing that a bit sooner probably isn't a bad thing in the long run, as long as I'm quite progressive with that. All the bike stuff just becomes zone 2. So I've only got 2 bikes in the week. Rather than the 3, because I think adding that extra interval running session might just play around with a bit of fatigue next week, so I don't want to overload it too much. But I'm still going to have that good zone 2 run just to keep building that aerobic capacity. And as I get closer and closer, this will ultimately just become a practice match, or it will become a really sport-specific session. Rather than just going out and doing easy stuff, it will be as competition or performance specific as possible is the ultimate outcome. Strength just continues on. Nothing too exciting this week with strength. I'm really just building on what I did this week. So adding a little bit of extra volume. I guess the key things that you'll notice, and I might just quickly show you here, is that really nothing's changing too much. I've added a couple of slightly different accessory exercises. And what I mean by that is something like the lateral lunge, work a little bit more groin and just in a different plane of motion. Is really important. I've added a little bit of upper body work to get some strength back into the shoulders, particularly for my bouncing, in terms of bouncing football to start a game, which you would have seen, I think, back in episode 1 of this series. I showed a quick clip of me bouncing a footy in the middle of the ground. The other key thing is in my big movements, the intensity is starting to lift. So I'm now getting to a point where I can start to increase the amount of weight on the bar, so to speak. So you'll see as much as it's not super high, and I don't plan to get this to crazy numbers. Really, I ideally want to get my key lifts from a squat and an RDL or a deadlift type pattern perspective up to about 1 times body weight. That I think for me, that's probably adequate enough to have a really good strength base to be able to do the powerful stuff I want to do on top of that as well in terms of sprinting, change of direction alike, but also from a gym perspective, being able to move things a lot quicker with a lot more force. That's ultimately the goal of what I'm trying to do for the most part. Like I said, there's a couple of little changes to these accessory exercises. Probably a really interesting one that I wanted to talk about is this Eccentric Nordic. I might actually put in a clip showing a bit what that is. Basically, it's a really good exercise for developing hamstrings, and in particular, developing the strength of your hamstring tendons, which for me is something that is obviously really critical with a high amount of high intensity running. And this doesn't necessarily just apply to me because I'm in a team sport environment or field-based sport environment. If you're a endurance-based athlete, maybe you're a track type runner, particularly runners, or you've had troubles with your hamstrings before, this is an absolute gold exercise just to develop a little bit of resilience through particularly the tendon, any hamstring tendon related injuries, tendinopathy, but also to prevent things like muscle tears. Basically, all I'm doing is putting the hamstring under what we call eccentric load. So the muscle itself is trying to produce contraction. It's under load, so to speak. But as I go through that movement, the nature of me, extending from the knee, if you like, and leaning down, what that does is the muscle's under length as well. So we get a little bit of damage as a result, which in the short term isn't great. It gives me a bit of DOMs in the legs, and I definitely felt that today after having done them the other day. But we don't need to do much. I'm only holding this on the way down for about 3 seconds or counting to 3, and then allowing it just to release, bring myself back up and go through. So it's just that small part that we're working on, but it's really, really good for developing strength and resilience, particularly through the hamstring and, like I said, the hamstring tendons. I'm going to slowly implement some of those into the program. You might start to see some crazy exercises where I'm up on a bench with one leg on top, one leg under, in like sort of a side plank type position. It's not actually a side plank. It's actually what we call a Copenhagen. We won't get caught up in why it's called that. I still don't really know because it's a bit of a bizarre name, but basically that's really targeting more of my groins, which is going to be critical for change direction. So I'm starting to get a bit more specific in terms of some targets of my strength exercise and being really strategic about areas I need to focus on to make sure I'm super resilient, so that when things like change direction, high speed running, or maximum speed, maximum velocity running come in, I'm going to be able to handle those really explosive and powerful movements because I've got the strength and resilience through the tissues to be able to do it. I don't want to go through a process like I did at the beginning of 2021, so this year, where I got all the way through to basically the practice match weekend, 2 weeks out from round 1, and I went and took off and did some acceleration work, and the top of my quad just went pop. Basically, that was just through a little bit of lack of preparation of the tissues fully, that ultimately, and also probably a bit of a rapid increase into that high speed running that probably could have been avoided by changing a few things up. So that's where I'm being a little bit more careful this time, a little bit more diligent about what work I do in the gym to supplement my running and conditioning side of things as well. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight in terms of my conditioning deload this week and how I've reloaded strength. I know there's that sort of slightly different style of periodization I'm going through. I'm hoping you're finding that pretty interesting at the moment. But like I said, if you want access to that full analysis of the first month, so the month of October, what happened in training, heart rate data, GPS data, all of that, what I did in strength sessions and really deep dive into it. It's going to basically cover everything from that first block in a lot more detail. Hit the join button down below, become a channel member. That's how you're going to get access to those bonus videos in this series. Otherwise, we'll catch you each week at the end of the week to give a bit of a summary and a wrap up as we have been normally. Hopefully got a bit of an insight in this one. Been enjoying doing this series so far. Always love to hear your thoughts. So let me know down in the comments. What do you want to see out of some of the training? Anything in particular coming up that I've talked about in this entry to the series that you're interested in hearing? Always happy to hear your thoughts and engage in the discussion and provide you insights in terms of what you want to learn about as well. So I'm going to leave it there for this one today. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.